Ethan Brooks stood at the edge of his luxury penthouse, staring out at the vibrant skyline of the city below. At 35, he had built a life most people only dreamed of. As the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing cybersecurity firm, his name was becoming synonymous with innovation in the tech world. Ethan was a man who thrived on precision and control. His life had been meticulously planned, each step taken with deliberate purpose. He knew what it took to succeed, and he had done just that. Behind him, the spacious living room stretched out, decorated with a minimalist elegance that mirrored his approach to life. The large glass windows reflected not just the city's glow, but the sense of accomplishment that permeated every corner of his home. His wife, Alyssa, a strikingly beautiful woman in her early 30s, was in the kitchen, her fingers gracefully skimming across the screen of her tablet as she reviewed legal documents. She was as much a powerhouse in her world as he was in his. Alyssa Brooks was one of the most sought-after corporate lawyers in the city. Her intelligence and charm made her a formidable opponent in the courtroom, and she had won more cases than many of her seasoned counterparts. Despite their demanding careers, she and Ethan had carved out what seemed to be the perfect marriage. From the outside looking in, they were the epitome of success, wealth, status, power. The two of them had been married for nearly 6 years, and their lives had unfolded like a series of calculated victories. They attended the finest galas, their names graced the most elite guest lists, and their photos were splashed across high-end magazines. They had built an empire together, two halves of a powerful unit that few could touch. But beneath the surface, Ethan had begun to notice the cracks. His work had always been his primary focus, and lately, he had thrown himself even deeper into it. His company, Brooks Tech, was on the verge of launching a new cybersecurity software that could revolutionize the industry. It was the culmination of years of hard work, and the anticipation of its release had created a buzz that he could feel in every boardroom, every phone call. But as the project neared completion, Ethan found himself facing an unsettling question: was this all there was? "Do you need help with dinner?" Ethan's voice broke the silence, turning towards Alyssa. "No, I've got it," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just finishing up some work." Ethan nodded, watching her for a moment longer than usual. Her beauty still captivated him, but there was something different lately. She had been distant, her smiles more forced, her laughter less genuine. It had started out as subtle changes: she worked late more often, was more evasive when he asked about her day, and seemed perpetually distracted. At first, Ethan had brushed it off, chalking it up to the stress of her demanding career. After all, he understood the pressures of success better than anyone. But now, the doubts crept in. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced down, expecting a message from one of his team members about the upcoming software launch. Instead, what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It was an email. No subject, no sender. Just a single line that sent a chill down his spine. "You don't know the whole truth about Alyssa." He clicked on it, his heart pounding in his chest. The email opened to reveal a series of photographs, each one more damning than the last. Alyssa, his beautiful, intelligent wife, was in the arms of another man. And that man wasn't just anyone, it was Jason. Jason Foster, Ethan's best friend and business partner. The two had been inseparable since their days in college, bonding over shared ambitions and dreams of building an empire. Jason had been there for every major milestone in Ethan's life. He had been his confidant, his right-hand man at the company, and the one person Ethan trusted implicitly. But the photos told a different story. There they were, Alyssa and Jason, together in ways that Ethan couldn't ignore. The timestamps on the images aligned perfectly with the times Alyssa had claimed to be on business trips, and Jason had been away on work-related travel. Every image, every moment, shattered the life Ethan thought he knew. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, his mind reeling. Disbelief washed over him, followed by a wave of nausea. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How could this be happening? The two people he trusted most in the world, his wife and his best friend, betraying him in the most devastating way possible? He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing, but the images were seared into his brain. When he finally opened them, his gaze fell on Alyssa, still in the kitchen, oblivious to the emotional storm that had just torn through him. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing him staring. Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, just work stuff," he lied, slipping the phone back into his pocket. His voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. As Alyssa returned to her tablet, Ethan's mind raced. This couldn't be real. There had to be an explanation. Jason wouldn't, Alyssa wouldn't. But the photos didn't lie. And now, a dark, gnawing suspicion took root in his heart. He had to know the truth, and he couldn't rest until he found it. Ethan knew his world was about to change, but he wasn't ready for just how deep the betrayal would go. In this exposition, Ethan Brooks, the protagonist, is introduced as a successful entrepreneur living in a modern city with his wife, Alyssa, and his best friend and business partner, Jason. At first glance, Ethan seems to have it all: wealth, power, and a seemingly perfect marriage. However, the discovery of an anonymous email suggesting Alyssa's infidelity begins to unravel the life he thought he knew, setting the stage for the emotional and psychological journey to come. The world around Ethan felt hollow. His penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now seemed cold and distant. The evidence from the anonymous email played on a loop in his mind, pulling him deeper into confusion and doubt. He tried to act normal in the following days, but every time he looked at Alyssa, his heart twisted painfully. Nights became a battleground of sleeplessness. Ethan would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Alyssa slept peacefully beside him. He analyzed every interaction between her and Jason, searching for any missed signs. Had there been clues? Subtle looks exchanged, conversations cut short when he entered the room, moments where things hadn't quite added up. He couldn't believe he had been so blind. A week passed, and his mind churned endlessly, trying to rationalize what he had seen. But the doubt had already taken root, and it was impossible to ignore. Every time Alyssa spoke to him, he questioned whether her words were genuine or part of some elaborate deception. One evening, after a particularly draining day at the office, Ethan sat alone in his home office, staring at his computer screen. The upcoming launch of his revolutionary cybersecurity software was at the forefront of his mind, but he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to the photos. His phone buzzed again, another anonymous email. This time, there were more photos, more evidence. Dates, times, and locations that coincided with moments when Alyssa had been traveling for work. And in every photo, Jason was there, his arm wrapped around her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was something far more deliberate, something that had been happening right under his nose for nearly a year. The photos, the timestamps, they were too detailed, too precise to ignore. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to consider the possibility that it was all true. The woman he loved, the woman he had shared his life with for the last 6 years, had been unfaithful. And not just with anyone, but with his best friend, his business partner, his brother-in-arms. He slammed his fist onto the desk, a sudden surge of anger coursing through him. The betrayal was too much to bear. How could Jason, the man who had stood by his side through every triumph and struggle, do this? How could Alyssa, the woman he had devoted his life to, betray him in this way? The weight of the realization crushed him, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt utterly lost. He couldn't confront them. Not yet. Not without more proof. The photos were damning, but he needed more. He needed to know the full extent of their betrayal before he could make his move. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Ethan did something he had never thought he'd have to do. He hired a private investigator. Mia Thompson came highly recommended. Discreet, efficient, and ruthless when it came to uncovering the truth, she was known for digging up secrets that people wanted to keep buried. Ethan contacted her the very next day, and within hours, they met in a small, private office away from the prying eyes of the public. Mia was sharp, with keen eyes that seemed to take in every detail. She sat across from Ethan, notepad in hand, listening intently as he laid out the situation. He showed her the emails, the photos, and the timeline of Alyssa's supposed trips. Mia remained expressionless, but Ethan could see the wheels turning in her mind. "I can take this on," Mia said, her voice calm and professional. "It'll take some time, but if there's more to this story, I'll find it." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He hated that it had come to this, that he had to hire someone to spy on his own wife and best friend. But he had no other choice. The truth, however painful, was the only thing that could set him free. As Mia left the office, Ethan felt a small flicker of hope. Soon, he would have the answers he needed. Soon, he would know the truth. But with the truth came the terrifying realization that his life might never be the same again. The days after hiring Mia seemed to blur together. Ethan tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, keeping up with his demanding work schedule and attending meetings about the upcoming software launch. But inside, his mind was a battlefield of suspicion, doubt, and heartbreak. His once sharp focus on business was now clouded by thoughts of Alyssa and Jason, and what they might be plotting behind his back. Ethan spent most of his time alone in his office, pretending to work while checking his phone obsessively, waiting for updates from Mia. The few interactions he had with Alyssa felt forced, as though she were hiding something beneath the surface of her usual composure. Every conversation, every glance, felt tainted by suspicion. When Jason called or texted about work, Ethan found it increasingly difficult to respond with the same warmth he once had. Their friendship, once a source of strength and trust, now felt like a web of lies. He scrutinized every word, every tone in Jason's voice, searching for signs of guilt or deception. One afternoon, Mia sent Ethan a short but cryptic message: "We need to talk. I found something." Ethan's heart raced as he read the words. He replied quickly, arranging a meeting in a discreet cafe on the edge of the city, far from the places he and Alyssa usually frequented. He arrived early, his mind racing with possibilities. What had Mia discovered? How much worse could it get? Mia entered the cafe with her usual confident stride, her expression serious. Without wasting any time, she slid into the seat across from him and placed a thin folder on the table. "I've been following Alyssa for a week now," Mia said in a low voice, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. "I've gathered more concrete evidence, and I think you need to see this." Ethan opened the folder, his hands shaking slightly. Inside were more photos, Alyssa and Jason meeting at various locations, their interactions far too intimate to be considered just business. But there was more. Along with the photos, Mia had included detailed notes of their conversations, recorded from the discreet surveillance she had conducted. Ethan's eyes scanned the transcripts, his chest tightening with every word. Alyssa and Jason weren't just having an affair, they were planning something far more sinister. Their conversations revolved around Brooks Tech, the software launch, and a deal they were quietly brokering with a competing company. The goal was clear: to sell Ethan's groundbreaking cybersecurity software behind his back and cut him out of the picture entirely. "They're planning to make the sale next month," Mia said, her voice steady. "From what I've gathered, they've already made contact with a rival company, and they're setting up meetings to finalize the deal." Ethan stared at the pages, his world crumbling around him. It wasn't just the betrayal of love that hurt anymore, it was the betrayal of everything he had built. His company, his hard work, his future, all of it was at risk because of Alyssa and Jason's greed. How could they do this? Ethan muttered, more to himself than to Mia. "I've seen this kind of thing before," Mia said, leaning forward. "When people get desperate or greedy, they'll stop at nothing. And from what I've seen, Alyssa and Jason have been planning this for months." Ethan closed the folder, feeling a wave of nausea wash over him. His mind raced, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Everything he had trusted was unraveling before his eyes. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "You have options. You can confront them, but that's risky. If they know you're onto them, they might accelerate their plan or try to cover their tracks. Or, you can gather more evidence, enough to not only stop them but to expose them legally. If they're selling your software and committing corporate espionage, you can take them down in court. Ethan nodded slowly, his thoughts swirling. Confronting them now would be satisfying, but it could also backfire. He needed more time, more leverage. The idea of taking them down legally appealed to him, especially with the gravity of their betrayal. But the emotional toll was already weighing heavily on him. As if reading his mind, Mia spoke again. I know this is a lot to process, Ethan. You're dealing with personal betrayal on top of a professional one. But you need to stay focused. They're counting on you being too emotional to act rationally. Ethan looked up at her, her calm and composed demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil he felt inside. She was right. He needed to think strategically. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. Keep digging, Ethan said, his voice steadier now. I need to know everything. If they're going to try and take everything from me, I need to be ready. Mia nodded, standing to leave. I'll keep you updated. As she walked away, Ethan sat back in his chair, staring blankly at the folder in front of him. The evidence was there, laid out in black and white. The woman he loved, the man he had trusted, had betrayed him in the most devastating way possible. But the realization that they were conspiring to ruin his business lit a fire in him. Ethan had always been a fighter. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let anyone, not even those closest to him, take it away. As painful as the truth was, it gave him clarity. He knew what he had to do. The game had changed. Now, it was a matter of strategy. And Ethan Brooks wasn't going down without a fight. As the days passed, Ethan's internal struggle deepened. On the surface, he continued to play his role, the successful entrepreneur, the devoted husband, the loyal friend. But beneath that facade, his heart and mind were in constant conflict. He couldn't shake the images and words Mia had revealed to him. They echoed in his head during quiet moments, haunting him even as he went through the motions of his life. At night, when Alyssa lay next to him, he found himself wide awake, unable to sleep. He could feel her presence beside him, but she felt like a stranger. Every touch, every word she spoke now felt tainted by betrayal. He had once believed that they had built something solid, something lasting. But now, all he could see was a woman who had deceived him for months, who was plotting against him with the one person he had trusted most. Jason, too, became a constant presence in Ethan's mind, turning every interaction into a test of his composure. They still met for business regularly, discussing the upcoming software launch, going over financials, and making plans for the future of the company. Every time Jason smiled or cracked a joke, Ethan's blood boiled with anger. How could he pretend as if nothing was happening? How could he sit across the table from Ethan and act like his friend while planning to destroy everything? But confronting them wasn't an option. Not yet. Ethan knew he had to play it smart, to gather every piece of information, every scrap of evidence. His emotions were running high, and the temptation to lash out was overwhelming, but he needed control. He had to think like the businessman he was, not the betrayed husband or friend. Any rash action could give Alyssa and Jason the advantage, and he couldn't afford that. The pressure built each day, eating away at him from the inside. He started spending more time at the office, throwing himself into work as a distraction. But even there, surrounded by his team and the technology that had made him a success, the paranoia crept in. He found himself second-guessing the loyalty of his employees, wondering if any of them were secretly working with Jason or Alyssa. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now they were spreading uncontrollably. Ethan's temper became shorter, his patience wearing thin. Meetings that once energized him now left him exhausted, drained by the effort of pretending that everything was fine. The software launch, the project that had been his passion for so long, was now a source of dread. Every time he thought about it, he imagined Alyssa and Jason plotting its sale behind his back, laughing at how easy it had been to manipulate him. One evening, Ethan sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home. The city's lights flickered outside the window, a stark contrast to the darkness growing inside him. He poured himself a drink, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. How had it come to this? He couldn't stop thinking about the years he had spent with Alyssa, the moments of joy, the successes they had shared, the quiet nights they had spent together, just enjoying each other's company. He had loved her deeply, trusted her with everything. And Jason had been there for all of it. He had stood by Ethan's side through the hardest moments of his life, celebrating his victories and helping him through his failures. And now, both of them had betrayed him. Ethan took a long sip of his drink, the alcohol burning his throat as it went down. He felt utterly alone, more isolated than he had ever felt in his life. There was no one he could talk to about this, no one who would understand the depth of his pain. He had been a man who prided himself on control, on having a clear vision of his life and his goals. But now, everything felt out of his grasp. He thought about Mia, the one person who knew the truth. Over the past few weeks, she had become his only confidant, the only person he could trust. She had been efficient and professional in her work, but there was something else, a quiet understanding in her eyes when they spoke, a recognition of the emotional toll this was taking on him. Ethan had never confided in anyone about his personal life before, but with Mia, it was different. She had seen the worst of it, and yet, she never judged. Still, even Mia couldn't fix this. No one could. Ethan knew that the decisions he had to make were his alone, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Mia. "I found more. We need to talk." Ethan's heart sank. What more could there be? What else had they done? He texted back quickly, setting up another meeting with her the next day. The sense of dread grew inside him as he stared at the phone. Whatever Mia had discovered, it couldn't be good. As he leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling, Ethan realized something that terrified him. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about deciding who he would become in the aftermath. Would he let this betrayal consume him, destroy everything he had worked for? Or would he find a way to rise above it, to fight back with the same precision and determination that had built his empire? Either way, Ethan knew that the man he once was, the man who had trusted so easily, who had believed in loyalty and love, was gone. What was left was something darker, something colder. And as much as it scared him, he knew it was the only way he would survive. The next morning, Ethan sat across from Mia in a private office, his heart pounding with anticipation. Mia was composed, her expression unreadable as she slid another folder across the table. Ethan hesitated before opening it, bracing himself for whatever new horror she had uncovered. "You're going to want to prepare yourself for this," Mia said quietly. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. Inside were more surveillance reports, more photos, and something else, a series of financial documents. His eyes scanned the pages, and with each line he read, the weight of what Mia had found crushed him. Not only had Alyssa and Jason been planning to sell his software behind his back, but they were also involved in something far more dangerous, corporate espionage. They had been stealing confidential data from Brooks Tech for months, selling it to rival companies for huge sums of money. Jason had used his position within the company to access sensitive information, while Alyssa had leveraged her legal connections to broker the deals. The scale of their betrayal was staggering. They weren't just plotting to ruin his business, they were committing crimes that could land Ethan in serious legal trouble. If they succeeded, not only would Ethan lose everything, but they had framed him as the mastermind behind the illegal data sales. All of the evidence pointed to him, and if the authorities got involved, Ethan would be the one facing charges. "They're setting you up," Mia said, her voice calm but firm. "If this goes public, they're going to pin everything on you. The financial trails, the data breaches, it all points to you." Ethan felt a wave of nausea wash over him. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what he was seeing. This wasn't just a betrayal of love or friendship, this was a calculated, cold-blooded plan to destroy his life. He sat back in his chair, staring at the documents in disbelief. How could they do this? His voice was barely audible, the shock evident. Mia sighed, her expression softening slightly. I've seen greed drive people to do unthinkable things. But this is personal. They're not just after money. They want to ruin you. Ethan's mind swirled with memories of Alyssa and Jason, the nights they had spent together, the shared dreams, the countless hours building the company alongside Jason. All of it had been a lie. Every smile, every conversation, every gesture of support, it had all been part of their plan. The two people he had trusted more than anyone had been plotting his downfall for months, if not longer. I can't believe this, he whispered, his voice shaking. I can't believe I didn't see it. You're not the first person to be blindsided by those closest to you, Mia said, her tone soft but firm. But now you know. And you have the evidence to prove it. Ethan nodded, though his mind was still reeling. He had the evidence, yes. But what was he supposed to do with it? If he went to the authorities, there was no guarantee they would believe him. The financial trails were damning, and the way Jason and Alyssa had framed him would be difficult to untangle in court. And if he confronted them directly, who knew what they would do? They might accelerate their plans, or worse, disappear before he had a chance to stop them. Ethan buried his face in his hands, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had always prided himself on being in control, on having the power to shape his own destiny. But now, for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. Mia watched him in silence for a moment before speaking again. You need to think carefully about your next move. Confronting them without a plan could backfire. But if you wait too long, they could succeed in taking everything from you. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes burning with the intensity of his emotions. What do you suggest? Mia leaned forward, her gaze steady. We need to gather more evidence, enough to not only prove their guilt but to clear your name completely. I've already started digging deeper into their financial dealings, but we need more time. We need to get close enough to them to catch them in the act. Ethan swallowed hard. The thought of letting this go on for even another day made his stomach churn, but Mia was right. He couldn't act impulsively. He needed to be smart, to think strategically. This wasn't just about his pride or his feelings, this was about survival. How much time do you need? Ethan asked. A couple more weeks, maybe less, Mia replied. We're close, but I need to make sure we have everything before we make our move. Ethan nodded slowly. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to act now, to confront Alyssa and Jason and end this nightmare. But he knew better. Acting out of anger or desperation would only make things worse. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Ethan admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Every time I see them, it's like I'm being torn apart. Mia's expression softened. I know this is hard, Ethan. But you have to stay focused. This is bigger than just you. If you don't stop them, they're going to destroy everything you've built. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Mia was right. He couldn't afford to let his emotions control him. He had to be smart, calculated. Just like they had been. Only this time, he would be the one pulling the strings. Okay, he said finally. I'll wait. But when the time comes, I'm taking them both down. Mia nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. Good. That's the right call. As Ethan stood to leave, Mia's voice stopped him. One more thing, she said, her tone careful. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that when this is over, there might not be anything left to salvage. Not your marriage, not your friendship, not your company. This is going to get messy. Ethan looked at her, his face hardening. I've already lost them. Now, it's about making sure they don't take anything more from me. With that, he walked out of the office, his heart heavy but his resolve stronger than ever. The deception ran deep, but Ethan was prepared to go even deeper to protect what was his. The next few weeks were some of the most grueling of Ethan's life. Every moment spent in Alyssa's presence felt like a dagger in his heart. Every business meeting with Jason was a painful exercise in restraint. The tension was suffocating, but Ethan buried it deep, maintaining the appearance of a man fully in control. In reality, he was unraveling inside. Ethan had always been decisive, a man of action, but now he found himself paralyzed by indecision. Mia continued to gather more evidence, and every new discovery added weight to the growing pile of betrayal. Yet, even with everything laid out before him, Ethan struggled with one question: what should he do next? The confrontation with Alyssa and Jason loomed in his mind, but the emotional toll of that decision was becoming unbearable. Could he really face them? Could he confront Alyssa, the woman he once loved deeply, knowing the depth of her betrayal? Could he look Jason in the eye and expose the monstrous truth that had shattered their friendship? Late one night, after another sleepless evening spent staring at the ceiling, Ethan found himself alone in his office, nursing a glass of whiskey. He swirled the amber liquid in the glass, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. What if there was a chance to salvage something? What if, despite everything, there was still a part of Alyssa that loved him? Could they repair the damage? Could they find a way to rebuild the life they had once shared? And what about Jason? The thought of losing his best friend forever filled him with a kind of sorrow he hadn't anticipated. Was there any way to confront Jason without destroying everything they had built together? Ethan's mind spun in circles, unable to settle on a single course of action. He had the evidence, the knowledge, but now that he was armed with the truth, he didn't know what to do with it. His emotional state deteriorated as the days dragged on, and he became more isolated, more paranoid. He started to withdraw from his employees, avoiding conversations that once came easily. His focus on the upcoming software launch wavered, and his once razor-sharp attention to detail began to slip. Rumors spread throughout the company about his erratic behavior, and Ethan could feel the weight of his crumbling reputation pressing down on him. The pressure was mounting, and Ethan was running out of time. He knew that Alyssa and Jason were getting closer to finalizing their deal, to selling his software to a competitor. The clock was ticking, and he had to act soon, but every step forward felt like walking through quicksand. One evening, after another exhausting day at the office, Ethan found himself sitting with Mia in their usual meeting spot. Her sharp eyes assessed him carefully, and Ethan knew she could see the toll this was taking on him. "You're unraveling," she said bluntly. "You can't keep this up, Ethan. You need to make a decision." Ethan stared down at the table, the weight of her words pressing on him. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to just confront them, end this nightmare. But then, I wonder if there's anything left to salvage." Mia's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not here to tell you what to do with your personal life. But professionally, they're not just betraying you. They're committing crimes, and if you don't act, they're going to take you down with them." "I know," Ethan muttered, rubbing his temples. "But it's not that simple." Mia leaned forward, her gaze intense. "It is that simple. You have evidence, and you have options. The longer you wait, the more power they gain. You're not just dealing with an affair, Ethan. You're dealing with people who are trying to destroy you." Ethan sighed, feeling the pressure of her words. She was right, of course. But his heart ached at the thought of what came next. There was no easy solution, no path that wouldn't leave him scarred. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating, and the emotional conflict only made it harder to think clearly. He stood abruptly, needing to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the conversation. "I need more time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia watched him go, her expression unreadable. "Just don't wait too long," she said quietly. "You might not have any time left." Over the next few days, the tension between Ethan, Alyssa, and Jason became palpable. Jason, always observant, began to suspect that something was off. Their meetings were strained, and Jason's friendly demeanor had taken on a more cautious tone. Ethan could see it in his eyes. Jason was watching him closely, calculating his every move. One afternoon, after a particularly tense board meeting, Jason approached Ethan as they left the conference room. "You okay, man?" Jason asked, his voice laced with concern. Ethan forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind with the launch coming up." Jason studied him for a moment, his eyes searching for something beneath the surface. "You've been off lately. If there's something going on, you can talk to me." Ethan's stomach churned with anger at Jason's audacity. The man who had been plotting his downfall for months, standing there pretending to be his friend. But Ethan kept his composure, knowing that revealing his hand too soon would only make things worse. "I'm fine," Ethan replied, his voice tight. "Just work stress." Jason nodded slowly, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. "All right. Just let me know if you need anything." As Jason walked away, Ethan's mind raced. The cracks were beginning to show. Jason was growing wary, and it wouldn't be long before he put the pieces together. Ethan needed to act, and soon. That night, as Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, he stared out at the city skyline, his thoughts spiraling out of control. The decision he had been avoiding for weeks now pressed down on him with unbearable force. Could he confront them? Could he expose the truth and destroy everything, his marriage, his friendship, his company? Or would he wait, hoping for a resolution that didn't end in complete ruin? The pressure was suffocating, and Ethan knew that whatever decision he made next would shape the rest of his life. Ethan woke up with a sense of impending doom. The weight of everything bore down on him as he moved through the motions of his morning routine, each step heavier than the last. The confrontation was inevitable, but he couldn't shake the fear that he wasn't ready, that when the moment came, he would falter, and everything he had built would collapse around him. At the office, the pressure was even more palpable. His work performance had declined, and whispers about his erratic behavior were circulating among his employees. The normally focused, confident Ethan Brooks was gone, replaced by a man barely holding it together. It didn't help that Alyssa was still acting distant, her late nights becoming more frequent, her excuses more hollow. Jason, too, had become increasingly suspicious, his eyes sharp whenever they crossed paths. The tension between them grew thicker with each passing day, an unspoken awareness that something was terribly wrong. As the software launch approached, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Ethan's company was at the center of the tech world's attention, and any misstep now would be catastrophic. But Ethan was more concerned about what was happening behind the scenes, about the betrayal unfolding in the shadows. He felt himself being pulled in two directions, his focus divided between saving his company and uncovering the truth about Alyssa and Jason's plot. One morning, as Ethan sat at his desk, staring blankly at the screen filled with endless reports and data projections, Mia called. Her voice was steady but urgent. "They're getting ready to make their move," Mia said. "I've been monitoring their communications closely, and the deal with the competitor is almost finalized. If they sell your software, it'll be over. You need to act now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had known this day was coming, but hearing the words out loud brought the reality crashing down on him. The decision he had been delaying for weeks was now staring him in the face, demanding action. But what would that action be? "I need more time," Ethan said, his voice strained. Mia's tone grew more forceful. "You don't have time, Ethan. If you wait any longer, they'll sell the software, and you'll lose everything. This is it. You need to decide." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. The image of Alyssa and Jason, standing together, plotting against him, flashed before his eyes. He couldn't let them win. Not after everything he had sacrificed, not after all he had built. "I know," he muttered. "I know." Mia paused, sensing his hesitation. "You can do this, Ethan. We have everything we need to take them down legally. But if you wait too long, they might disappear before we can stop them." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had never felt more conflicted, but he knew that Mia was right. The time for waiting was over. It was now or never. "I'll confront them," Ethan said finally, the words heavy on his tongue. "Are you sure?" Mia asked, her voice cautious. Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Yes. I have to do this." That evening, Brooks Tech was hosting a high-profile company gala to celebrate the imminent launch of the new software. The event was the perfect opportunity for Ethan to make his move. It would be a public setting, with key stakeholders, employees, and media present. If Alyssa and Jason thought they could carry out their betrayal quietly, they were wrong. Ethan was going to expose them in front of everyone. As the evening approached, Ethan dressed in his finest suit, trying to maintain his composure. Alyssa stood beside him, looking as elegant as ever in a sleek black gown, her smile masking the deception underneath. She had no idea what was coming. Jason would be at the gala too, charming the guests, playing his part in the scheme that would soon be blown wide open. When they arrived at the event, the atmosphere was electric. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. But Ethan barely noticed. His eyes scanned the room, searching for Jason. When he finally spotted him, Jason was laughing with a group of investors, his expression carefree, as though he hadn't been conspiring to ruin Ethan's life. Ethan's blood boiled, but he kept his expression neutral. This was the moment. He couldn't afford to lose his nerve now. Mia had discreetly arrived at the gala as well, blending in with the crowd. She had a file of evidence ready, a damning collection of everything Alyssa and Jason had done. Once Ethan made his move, there would be no turning back. The evening wore on, and the tension in Ethan's chest grew unbearable. Finally, he spotted his moment. Alyssa and Jason were standing together, smiling and talking as though nothing was wrong, as though they hadn't been plotting behind his back for months. Ethan approached them slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. As he neared, Jason turned to him, a wide grin on his face. "Ethan, there you are. We were just talking about how incredible this launch is going to be," Jason said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. Ethan forced a smile, though his stomach churned with disgust. "Actually, Jason, there's something I need to talk to both of you about." Alyssa raised an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing slightly in suspicion. "What is it, Ethan?" Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze hardening. "I know everything." For a brief moment, confusion flickered across their faces, but then Jason's expression changed, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Alyssa's smile faltered, her hand tightening around her glass. "Everything?" Jason repeated, his voice strained. Ethan nodded slowly, his voice cold and steady. "The affair. The corporate espionage. The deal you're planning to make behind my back. I know all of it." Alyssa's face paled, her mask of composure slipping. "Ethan, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Ethan cut her off, his voice rising. "I trusted you both. I built this company with you, Jason. I loved you, Alyssa. And this is how you repay me? By plotting to destroy everything I've worked for?" The room had gone silent, all eyes now on the unfolding scene. Jason shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the crowd. He could feel the walls closing in. "Ethan, we can explain," Jason said, his voice wavering. "This isn't what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Ethan spat, his anger boiling over. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "These two have been plotting to sell my software to a competitor, stealing confidential data from my company. They've betrayed me in every possible way." The gasps from the audience were audible. Jason's face flushed with panic as the truth was laid bare in front of everyone. Ethan took the file from Mia, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is the evidence. Everything they've done. They're criminals, and they're about to be exposed." Alyssa's face crumpled, her eyes wide with fear. Jason, realizing there was no way out, took a step back, his eyes darting to the exits. But it was too late. Security approached, and within moments, Jason and Alyssa were being escorted out of the room, their reputations and lives in ruins.